Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. As most of you probably know, I started this series of videos to expose the lie that Elliot Rodger was connected to the men's rights movement. But I am now expanding it to cover any falsehoods, misconceptions, misinformation, or outright lies spread about the MRM. So let's get stuck into it. Do you remember Mr. Kevin Logan from last episode?
Hello there. Today I thought I'd take you through the 10 worst lies told by the men's rights movement.
Well, we still have 7 points to go on his list, so let's get stuck into it.
Number 4. Sperm jacking. Now you may well ask yourself, what the heck is sperm jacking?
Where I'm from, we call that having a wank.
It's essentially the act of a woman stealing a man's baby gravy.
Oh, he means something different. Well, there goes all the Kevin is a wanker jokes I had planned. But seriously, continue Kevin, this is getting interesting.
Now this can come in many forms, if you'll pardon the pun. It can be as simple as a woman scooping up an otherwise deposited amount of ejaculate and manually inserting it into her own vagina, all the way through to a woman drugging a man, jerking him off and stealing his testicular essence. Now these obviously ludicrous scenarios that get painted as if they're everyday occurrences are almost told as anecdotes by the tinfoil-hatted fool who happens to be whinging about them at any given time, because they very rarely have happened to the person themselves, because they very rarely happen at all.
If we are talking about the most extreme examples, where, for example, a celebrity is targeted, like supposedly in the case of Boris Becker, I would agree with Kevin. But we should ask, are there more common, everyday occurrences as well?
Hi Wendy, my name is Kendra. How you doing?
Very well, Kendra. How can I help you?
So I've been married for 6 years, and me and my husband just had our first baby girl about 9 months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So before we were married, he promised me we would have 2 kids, and now he doesn't want any more. My friends think I should trick him and stop taking my birth control. What do you think, Wendy?
I'm embarrassed to say this because I don't like spousal lying. However, men have never been in control of our bodies. We're the ones in control. I'm not going to suggest that you do that, but look into my eyes and tell me what I'm saying. Okay? He promised. Wait, can I just take a quick poll? Clap if you think that she should trick him. My people. Up next, everybody.
I think this clip speaks volumes. There was no condemnation for wanting to trick her husband into having an unwanted child. In fact, she received the exact opposite. She received enthusiastic support. But this is an American talk show, so maybe we should look at another, more credible example.
About stealing your partner's sperm so that you could get pregnant. Last week, journalist Liz Jones caused a bit of a stir when she admitted that she had stolen sperm from 2 boyfriends in an attempt to have a baby.
Well, Liz Fraser says that no matter how desperate a woman may be to get pregnant, dirty tricks like this are simply not acceptable.
Well, both Liz Fraser and Liz Jones join us now. So, Liz Jones, let's start with you first of all. You're an outspoken columnist. Anyone who reads your column will know the sort of thing they're going to get. It's not the first time you've ruffled a few feathers. But you have said yourself that you are not and wouldn't be a natural mother.
Yes, I suppose to fill people in a little bit, I was in my late 30s before I had a proper relationship. I guess like many women who'd had a career, I was a bit desperate. I also, slightly at the back of my mind, felt that if I had a child, my partner was more likely to stick around. I think that's a mistake that many women make. I'm not condoning that women tried to get pregnant without telling their husband. I'm just saying that it happens.
But you say yourself you didn't consider yourself to be a mumsy type. In fact, you looked down on mumsy types.
Yes. But it just shows, if even I did it, who wasn't really that desperate to be a mum, I thought it might be just something to do. I might get a year off maternity leave. I might get the man to hang around.
So, sorry, you're being a mum to get maternity leave and to get a man to hang around?
Women have lots of different reasons for having babies. Some of them may be vanity, some of them may be they feel they might be missing their chance. It gives them something to love.
Wow.
So luckily, it didn't work with me, but I felt it was something that had to be talked about.
Yes.
Because I don't think men are quite as aware.
Well, we'll discover that as we sort of plough our way through the story, because you say that the partner that you had at the time, but we've heard your reasons for thinking about starting a family, he was wildly unsuitable, you say. So not only were your reasons for having a baby interesting, to say the least, but you were picking a man who wasn't even suitable.
But I think when a woman gets to the end of her reproductive lifespan, which I was, and when I got married I was in my 40s, you do get desperate, and it's who you happen to be with. So even though I was with a husband who was a lot younger, wasn't ready to be a dad, I thought, right, well, he may be a baby himself. This is my last chance.
He said he didn't trust you.
Yeah, it's your last chance.
So he said, and he insisted on condoms, because he said, I think in the back of his mind, looking at what you said, he reckoned that you were going to trick him.
Yeah, so I'm not saying it's a good idea at all. It's really lucky that it didn't work with me. But I'm saying that women will get desperate, and the older you get, the more desperate you get, the more unlikely the man might be to be ready. He may not be ready. He may be ready in 2 years' time.
If you had fallen pregnant, would you have told him the truth? Would you have said, oh, well, that was an accident. How did that happen?
No, I don't think I would. And I would have just said I didn't do it deliberately. Oh, dear, you know, what shall we do about it?
You'd have lied. You'd have lied.
Well, lots of women I spoke to for this feature, they said, well, of course I didn't tell him. Of course
Thieves and liars.
You think
women think they know better than men.
See, this worries me slightly, and Liz, I think you'll agree with me slightly here. I mean, this is not very girl power, this, is it? I mean, this is sort of giving us a very bad name, and I worry about that.
I think the biggest thing that's going to come out of this piece is that any men reading it or watching this morning are going to be terrified to sleep with the women that they're sleeping with.
I think we should explain, before we go any further, how you actually did this.
Okay,
he insisted, and very sensibly insisted, on using a condom. Then you took that used condom when he didn't realise, and strange thing to lose sight of. But you then took that and used its contents in your bathroom to inseminate yourself. So let's carry on, having known the method.
What I wanted to say is, I mean, we're talking about complete manipulation of a person's life. You said the word trust earlier on, Phil, as well. You know, relationships are about trust. And now, many women listening will know, of course, one does not always trust the man that one's with. OK, human relationships are very complicated, and we need to be careful because we are the ones who are going to have the baby, OK? So there are many women who know that they're with a man who's going to be very careful. Of course, he's going to be careful. 30 seconds later, you're knocked up, and that's a big problem for you. But we, as women, we hold the trump card, actually, when it comes to having children. If a woman would like to lie to her partner, she can become pregnant without telling him. That is completely hijacking his life. You don't get a year off on maternity leave. You get 50 years of parenting.
Basically, guys, it's a non-issue because it's a statistical irrelevance. It happens so fucking rarely.
So fucking rarely? Really? How exactly would you know, Kevin? Are you monitoring the bedrooms across the world? Checking to make sure everyone's taking their birth control pills? The simple fact is, Kevin, you have no idea what accidents are actual accidents, and what ones are something completely different. Now let me be clear here, before I'm accused of saying something I'm not. I am in no way suggesting that all, or even the majority of women are like this, but you'd have to be a fucking idiot to think that there aren't some who are. And I suspect that this number will grow, as more women put off having children until their late 30s, because they have previously focused on their careers, and now their biological clock is ticking. And this might be my last opportunity attitude kicks in.
Are you breeding suspicion then between couples? I mean, that's a really...
men should be suspicious. I mean,
relationships are hard, but relationships are hard enough already without it starting from suspicion. That's a horrible place. It should be starting from trust and growing from there.
Well, I spoke to lots of men about this as well, and it's sort of, they are trusting, and it didn't really occur to them that a woman in her late 30s or early 40s might be manipulating them because they think it's their last chance. I'm sure my husband wasn't aware of
Liz,
it.
if you want to have a baby, okay, there are many ways.
But I'm not saying it's a good thing.
If you want to have a baby, there are many ways for women to go and have a baby. You can go to places where men who have voluntarily donated their sperm to a place to have a baby, and you can do that.
Maybe if you're married to a man, you'd rather have his baby than go to
he doesn't want
it.
He doesn't want it, Liz. This is the whole point. And I do want to quote one thing that you said, because someone mentioned the word rights. You said in your piece, I thought it was my right, given that he was living with me and I had bought him many, many M&S meals. Now, I know you're throwing that away as a joke, you know, whatever. It's a kind of flippant comment. That's fine. We all do that.
Tongue-in-cheek.
It is. Oh, no, I understand that. And the viewers are...
I'm being facetious.
Intelligent enough to know that. They are. But you say it's your right to have this child. It's his right not to have
Well, why
a child.
then?
Also, it runs counter to the PUA arguments that get put around about men spreading their super serum as widely as possible, and then, obviously, the ensuing deadbeat dads.
Fucking hell, Kevin. Did you ever take a moment to think, just a fucking moment you idiot, that it runs counter to the pickup artist attitude, because we aren't fucking pickup artists? Oh, but that's right, without the false association with the pickup artists, you really have no substantial evidence against us, do you? Fucking amazing, Kev, just fucking amazing. Next.
It's almost as if they don't have a coherent worldview at all and they're just making shit up as they go along based upon their own bigoted biases.
No, actually, it's more like dishonest feminist arseholes are trying to falsely associate two completely different groups together in an attempt to create propaganda. Next.
Also, guys, if you want to try and convince us that you're serious about the importance of your own bodily fluids, you should stop advocating and promoting ideas like financial abortion. Now, many of you might be thinking, what the heck is financial abortion? Basically, it's the idea that a man can shoot his load into a woman and then completely wash his hands of any of the repercussions that come from that, i.e., he doesn't want to have to pay for the baby. Yeah, you're really responsible, aren't you, guys?
Okay, Kevin, let's talk about responsibility. If a man consents to sex, then he consents to potential parenthood. It doesn't matter if he doesn't want to be a father. It doesn't matter if he isn't ready to be a father. It doesn't matter if he was tricked or deceived as in the videos I just showed. It doesn't even matter if he was too young to give legal consent, and thus was a victim of statutory rape. But if a woman consents to sex, and she becomes pregnant, if she doesn't want to be a mother, she has options. If she isn't ready to be a mother, she has options. If she's tricked or deceived into becoming pregnant, she has options. If she's the victim of rape, she has options. Now there is a fair argument as to why women have so many options, and men don't, and that's simply, it's their body which has to carry the child for 9 months. But where that argument falls apart is that these options extend past pregnancy. In America there is the Safe Haven Law, also known as the Baby Moses Law, which allows the mother to anonymously abandon their child at a police station, fire station, or hospital, depending on the state. Now I assume Kevin would be against this law because...
Yeah, you're really responsible, aren't you, guys?
Oh, that's right, Kevin thinks only the father should be responsible. Right, Kev? By all means correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, and tell us in the comments section that you think mothers using the Safe Haven Law are avoiding responsibility. But the really funny thing here is that poor old Kevin is blissfully unaware that there are feminists who support financial abortion for males. I'm sure they're all women-hating, misogynistic, mother's basement-dwelling, shitlords too, right, Kevin? From the Alabama Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Law Review. Volume 5, 2013. Coerced Parenthood is Family Policy, Feminism, the Moral Agency of Women, in Men's Right to Choose. By Lisa Lucille Owens. Under this rubric, any male who finds himself having fathered a child, whether as a product of a committed or a fleeting relationship, is subject to at least 18 years of financial support, should the mother choose to birth and raise the child. This is decreed by each state through its laws, without consultation with the man and without regard to his own sentiments and actions. In contrast, the states grant a woman from conception until around 24 weeks of pregnancy, and beyond that when one considers the adoption option, the privilege, inclusively as a constitutional right, to choose whether or not to bear the burden of motherhood. Furthermore, Under the safe haven laws of many jurisdictions, a woman may relinquish her parental rights and obligations by abandoning her newborn child in a safe place, like a police station or a church. In spirit, and sometimes by statute, as men are not always granted an analogous ability to take advantage of safe havens, these types of laws clearly cater towards aiding the female actor in her specific circumstance. The pregnant woman is given the decision-making power both for herself and for the male as to whether both will become parents. Given that many individuals consider parenthood, or non-parenthood, to be among one of the most fundamental and consequential events in their lives, this decision-making power is no small matter. Nothing in the argument that this article advances calls for ignoring the biological realities of the differences between the sexes vis-à-vis reproduction. It would almost certainly be an affront to a pregnant woman that a man should have any say as to what she does with her body and the fetus she houses inside it. For the male to be granted any right or ultimate say in the matter would be an abrogation of the woman's autonomy. Perhaps a biological reality exists that when a man engages in sexual activities with a woman he gives her the right or ability to bear any progeny that they conceive. What he certainly does not grant her, however, is the right to bind him to 18 years of financial obligation to the child or other legal and social parameters of fatherhood. Nevertheless, under the current child support scheme employed by most states in the United States, if a child is born out of wedlock, the child's biological father is required to pay part of his income to the child's mother or a substitute guardian. However, both men and women are moral agents, and, just as women are more than wombs, men are more than inseminators, or pocketbooks. Just as with women, men's reproductive rights are derived from their own interests in controlling when and how they become reproducers. Men have parallel interests that must be recognized apart from any generalizations made about their sexuality. Women as sexual beings are subject to all sorts of, often conflicting, stereotypes. They are at once prudish, whorish, selfish, selfless, irresponsible, tricky, righteous, and motherly. Men are also subject to certain societal expectations about their sexuality that color the current social and legal status quo of their sexual autonomy. Most notably, and for perhaps relevant evolutionary and historical reasons, men as sexual beings are viewed as brutes who must be forced to atone for uncontrolled sexual urges. It's actually an interesting paper. As always, link below to the abstract. You can download the entire paper in PDF format from there. But Lisa Lucille Owens isn't the only feminist to support male reproductive rights. As I've spotlighted before in this series, prominent feminist Karen DeCrow defended a man in court back in the 80s. From the Atlantic article, the feminist leader who became a men's rights activist. DeCrow raised eyebrows in 1981 when she served as defense counsel to Frank Serpico, the former New York detective and whistleblower, in a paternity suit. Serpico claimed the plaintiff had used him as a sperm bank and lied about being on the pill while knowingly trying to conceive, and asserted that he had a constitutional right not to become a parent against his will. The family court judge, a woman, ruled in Serpico's favor, but he lost on appeal. DeCrow, by then a lawyer in private practice in Syracuse, New York, endorsed Serpico's argument on feminist grounds. Just as the Supreme Court has said that women have the right to choose whether or not to be parents, men should also have that right, she told the New York Times, calling this the only logical feminist position to take. Did you hear that, Kevin? The only logical feminist position to take. But I guess now you'll just try to claim that Karen DeCrow was a PUA. It seems to be your favorite tactic. Next.
Meanwhile, in anti-feminist land, characterize feminism as a system of severe mental retardation. An actual position from change.org.
Sorry? What was that? I didn't quite get it.
Am I totally not kidding?
Sorry? Could you repeat that?
Am I totally not kidding?
Nope. Still didn't get it.
Am I totally not kidding?
Sorry, dude. I'm trying to understand you. Can you repeat that again?
Am I totally not kidding? Am I totally not kidding?
Okay. I've almost got it. Something about La Toya, or maybe his toilet? One more time.
Am I totally not kidding?
Let's just continue, and get this over with.
There are people out there who suffer with extreme mental retardation on a daily basis. Sadly, most of these poor souls are left without proper treatment, simply because their systems do not recognize a sign of the severe mental disorder they clearly have. I urge the American Psychological Association, APA, to classify radical feminism as a sign of severe mental retardation and other associated disorder. It's time we get these poor deluded souls the help that they so desperately need.
I know he's meant to be reading the text on the screen, but the noises he's making just aren't matching the words.
Yet to the American Psychological Association characterize feminism as a system of severe mental retardation.
I guess he doesn't see the irony of using that voice while criticizing a troll making the claim that feminists are mentally ill.
So anyway, I don't know read from this article that I will link down in the description if anyone to read for themselves. So anyway, over the course of its 69-year history, the Soviet Union was notorious for its heavy-handed suppression of political dissent, most influentially through the use of the Siberian gulags.
Siberian gulags? If I remember right, that's the alien race from Season 2 of Doctor Who. Hold on, when did we start talking about sci-fi?
But it was during the 1960s and 1970s that the Communist Party took their intolerance for ideological deviance to extremes by diagnosing and institutionalizing so-called counter-revolutionaries with mental illness.
Nope. Still didn't get it.
It was a flattering episode in Soviet history which perfectly healthy citizens will redeem psychotics simply on account of their political views. And indeed, what better way to deal with activists and naysayers than to diagnose them as being mentally unstable? Dissenters who are often seen as both a burden and a threat to the system could be easily discredited and detained. So, to your MRAs and anti-feminists and other people who are scientists petition, you are basically like the Soviets. Yeah, they're what you are, the Soviets.
This connoisseur of communication, this master of mumbles, is Andrew Norton. And poor old Andrew isn't too bright. You see, when he started making videos on his channel, he would use the voice you just heard as a sarcastic stereotype of what he thought MRAs and MGTOW sound like.
Hello folks, this is MGTOW, White Parenthood 146782, and I'm here to respond to this mangina. The mangina talking about is none other than HannibalTheVictor, kid, because he's fat. I mean, the only reason why this fatso make videos about MRAs like me is—
Yeah, that's enough of that. But the funny thing is, at some point Norton switched from his satirical MRA character to his own persona, without changing the voice. Which just seems idiotic, unless he's intentionally trying to take the piss out of himself, which it would appear he's not. I know I've joked before that this is his real voice, but I think it's pretty clear it's not. But if I'm wrong, Andrew, send me a message, mate, and I'll help you out with some text-to-speech software. But most of you are probably wondering what his video was about. So let me sum it up in a couple of lines, or as I like to call it, Banesplaining. Andrew found that someone had posted a petition on change.org to have feminism categorized as a mental illness, and because of this Andrew thinks that all MRAs everywhere are just like the Soviets who claim dissidents were mentally ill. Of course, Andrew seems to be under the misconception that MRAs are actually the ones in positions of power. Of course, the usual suspects were in the comments section as per usual, with one exception who did an excellent job of summing up what I was intending to say. From Tragedy Strikes. Well, Jesus. Do you actually think this is serious, or that the creator thinks this will be taken seriously? My first guess would be no, and that it's just simply an insult in the form of a petition. That said, I'm not going to say there is no possibility of an anti-feminist doing this and being serious in thinking it would actually reach the goals it claims to want to reach. So for now I'll simply be impartial in terms of what the motives are. Of course, you take the opportunity to claim that the people that support this are MRAs, despite no actual validation of that claim. Essentially, you're using propaganda. Another case is that you're using a small amount of anti-feminists, whose motives you are not sure of entirely, to generalize against all anti-feminists. A quick Google check would also show that the same thing has been done to the MRM. Actually, let me just jump in here and point out that there are at least 2 of these type of petitions that I know of, that have been aimed at the men's rights movement. The first was from change.org, and seems to have since been taken down. It was from about 2 years ago and read, "Categorize the MRM as flaggable for terrorism promoting hate on YouTube." The second came out about a year ago, and was to petitionswhitehouse.com. I'm going to read all of this one just to show how crazy it is. Classify the men's rights movement as a terrorist group. The men's rights movement, MRM, is a misogynistic movement that advocates violence against women and girls. Multiple members of the MRM, self-identified men's rights activists, MRAs, have committed atrocities and mass murders. Mark Lapine killed 17 women on the university campus in the Montreal Massacre. Tom Ball firebombed a courthouse and wrote a manifesto encouraging others to bomb government buildings that is posted on major MRM websites like avoiceformen.com. Elliot Rodger, an active MRA, shot and killed at least 7 young women and injured many other people at random. Rodger is being celebrated as a martyr and hero by the movement, which will likely cause other MRAs to emulate his crimes. This is what the MRM does, and action must be taken against them to protect women and girls. And the sad thing is, with so much of the media spreading this type of misinformation, Elliot Rodger being the perfect example, you never know when someone in authority might take this shit seriously, or at least pander to them. I doubt the same could be said for treating feminism as a mental illness. But back to the commenter. Oh, and that there have also been those that say that criticizing feminism should be criminalized. When you claim someone is comparable to another group, you do not look favorable upon its best to ensure your own group has not done the same thing. In fact, from a petition I found doing the same to the MRM, there were more voters. So the comparison, if we are to conclude it is a valid one, is more comparable to people such as yourself. Tut, tut. Due to all the above, I am finding it hard to decide between 2 possibilities of the use of the voice you use here. Are you intentionally trying to sound mentally deficient to imply that what you said in response is moronic, for reasons above, or is it used to portray irony to those opposing feminism? Oh, look. Familiar faces in the comments section. Surprised that those people agree with this video. Did I say surprised? I meant predictable. Anyway. On my way. Whistles. Needless to say, I'm tempted to start a petition to stop Andrew Norton acting like an idiot, but I'm afraid that no matter how many signatures it got, it couldn't change reality. Next.
Number 5 is alive. Chivalry is a female privilege. Now, first of all, I think it's worth pointing out the fact that there are no MRAs who actually practice chivalry, because they're total fucking pricks. This is a particularly popular MRA talking point, as they will say that feminists, or women in general, will call differential treatment of the sexes chivalry when it suits them and sexism when it doesn't. One particular example they will bring up is that of the Titanic. The idea of women and children first. Now, whilst on the Titanic, yes, women and children survived disproportionately to men, it's also the case that people in the first class survived better than those of the third class. Are we going to say that class is the issue?
Actually, I think class was an issue on the Titanic, as it is in society today. But can be seen as the only factor. For example, if class is the only factor concerning the homeless, then why do we have such a large gender disparity? Oh, let me guess, patriarchy did it.
I don't think you are you, really?
Actually, I just did. Obviously class was a factor on the Titanic, that doesn't negate the fact that gender was as well. Next.
A study linked below suggests that actually the Titanic is the exception rather than the rule in maritime history.
So let's look at Kevin's link. It goes to a study called Gender, Social Norms, and Survival in Maritime Disasters. Admittedly, it's an interesting study, and may actually be correct. It studied 18 maritime disasters spanning 3 centuries, and compared female survivability with that of male survivability, and concluded that women have a survival advantage over men in only 2 of the 18 disasters, the Birkenhead and the Titanic. For 11 of the shipwrecks, they found that women have a survival disadvantage compared with men. And for the remaining 5 shipwrecks, they found no clear evidence of survival differences between men and women. I do, however, have a couple of points to make about this study. Just because women have a lower survival rate, does not necessarily mean that they weren't given preferential treatment, or that men were given preferential treatment. For example, children had the lowest rate of survival. If you think about it, the reason why is obvious. Children are not as strong as adults, and therefore are more likely to get injured, die of injuries, or die from exposure to the elements. Even in the case of the Titanic, where the women and children first order was clearly given, a higher percentage of children died than women. The reason for this is simple: adult women are more capable of surviving a disaster than a child. But the majority of males are also stronger than females, so you would expect more males to survive a disaster, possibly even if females are given preferential treatment. But having said that, based on the study's findings, it does actually appear that in most cases, at least out of those 18 in the study, that women and children were not first, but it was instead everyone for him or herself. Which isn't a surprise in a disaster. Often morality is the first casualty of panic. However, this does not disprove the existence of chivalry in the greater historical context.
Now, if we're going to talk about hypocrisy, you can look no further than the MRM themselves. One fantastic example of MRM hypocrisy came recently, during the split-up and then the getting back together of Davis M.J. Orini and Jordan Owen.
Neither of which are men's rights activists, or have anything to do with chivalry being a female privilege.
The 2 bastions of journalistic integrity behind the Sarkeesian Effect documentary. Now, for those who don't know, Anita Sarkeesian is a feminist vlogger who has made a series of videos about female depiction in video games. This kicked up a bunch of fucktards on the internet under the hashtag Gamergate. Now, Gamergate ostensibly claims to be about journalistic integrity and ethics, but it isn't. Essentially, for the most part, it's a bunch of fucking butthurt dickwads on the internet complaining about women with strong opinions. And out of this movement sprang the Sarkeesian Effect documentary. The 2 aforementioned asshats got themselves together a crowdsourcing campaign to make a documentary about what a demon and what a monster she is. But in doing so, they've actually done the same things that they accuse her of doing. Now, having worked on this project for several months together, Orini and Owen split recently, although they have subsequently kissed and made up. But in the process of doing so, Orini released the Skype logs in a moment of childish pique.
Fuck Kevin, are we still on number 5? What has any of this to do with the men's rights movement, or chivalry being a female privilege?
They don't reveal either men in a particularly good light, and they are a hilarious read. They're linked below. Although you will find that they're a paste-bin article, because Davis Orini has now subsequently taken those Skype blogs down. Yeah, journalistic integrity for the win. Also in those Skype blogs, it's revealed several times that Davis Orini thinks that Jordan Owen is left-wing, even though Jordan Owen is so far up Ayn Rand's arse he can see out of her fucking mouth. In those Skype blogs, it's revealed that depending on who you believe, Davis Orini has spent either $2,000 or $3,000 of patrons' money on buying a car for himself. He has then tried to blackmail and extort money out of Jordan Owen in order to try and complete the thing himself. So let's get this right. They have taken a lot of money. They were asking for $15,000 initially, but thankfully they got nowhere near that amount. Davis Orini has then misappropriated $2,000 or $3,000 of that money for his own personal gain. He has then used blackmail and extortion to try and get money out of it and engaged in a cover-up. Yeah, journalistic ethics for the win. And the hypocrisy of the MRM is that they still bitch on about Anita Sarkeesian, who as far as we can see has done nothing legally wrong, yet you hear very little out of the MRM about the obviously unethical and very possibly illegal actions of Davis Orini.
To be perfectly honest with you, I don't really care what people choose to do with their own money. It's their business if they want to give it to Sarkeesian, or Owen and Orini, or the fucking Church of Scientology, or whoever. If Orini has in fact misappropriated funds, then his donators are more than entitled to hold him accountable. Or if Owen and Orini failed to produce a movie, then their donators have every right to hold them accountable. But let's not forget that Sarkeesian asked for a specific amount of money to produce a specified number of videos in a specified amount of time. She got a far greater amount of money than she asked for, yet still hasn't met her goals. She has however taken additional donations since. And that is what gets her criticism. Next.
Yet they want to lecture everyone else about hypocrisy? Now whilst we're on the subject, I'd like to play you this little clip from Davis Orini regarding the reunification of Orini-Owen Productions.
Once again, Orini is not an MRA. And we have ventured right off the topic of chivalry being a female privilege.
Both Jordan and myself have just been getting hammered from these social justice warriors, which has just been making both of us more and more belligerent, and quite frankly, we wound up taking it out on each other and then taking it out on the project. We're in good company with this. Look up the production of I believe the first Godfather movie, so we're not alone.
That's right, his narcissism knows no fucking bounds. He just compared himself to Francis Ford Coppola, for fuck's sake. Yes, Davis Orini, as director of this particular project, compared himself to one of the greatest filmmakers in the history of the moving picture. Now just for shits and giggles, below I've linked the Internet Movie Database pages for both the Sarkeesian Effect documentary, yes, it does have an IMDb page, and the original Godfather movie. Now if you want to, you can go and compare and contrast the list of crew and cast for both of those films, and work out why one of them would have been a logistical nightmare involving massive egos and huge Hollywood stars, and the other one should have been a hell of a lot easier to bring together. But I digress.
Yes, you did digress, Kevin. The vast majority of number 5 was in fact digression. Anyway, that's it for Kevin in this episode. The next item on his list concerns circumcision, and I suspect I'll need more time to debunk his bullshit than I have left in this episode. But Kev will return. After all, we still have 5 items from his list to get through. But for now, next. So a short time after completing segment 1 of this video, I came across this next article, and thought it would make a nice bookend for the video. It's by Jessica Valenti, and recently appeared in The Guardian. It's called Nick Loeb, Sofia Vergara and the Men's Rights Movement, Can You Ask Someone to Parent Against Their Will? The answer, Jessica, based on the first segment of this video, would be yes. But in this case, Jessica is talking about mothers, so I'm going to take a wild guess and say she means no. Anyway, let's continue. The pro-life and men's rights movements have a burning question: if women have a right to choose when to have children, men's rights say, shouldn't men as well? Now Jessica is attempting a couple of dirty tricks here. The first is to associate all men's rights activists with the right to lifers. Although it is true that some MRAs fall into this camp, It's also true that some don't, and many are somewhere in between. Personally, I'm pro-choice. I like to use the analogy of postal workers. Some are pro-choice, some are right-to-lifers, and some don't give a shit one way or another. But no sane logical person would say that all postal workers are right-to-lifers, based on the beliefs of a percentage of postal workers. At best you can say that the men's rights movement is split on the topic of abortion. But Jessica wants to paint us all as some mutated right-wing cross between Rush Limbaugh in a Nazi uniform and the Westboro Baptist Church. Her next dirty trick is to conflate the right, or lack thereof, to choose to be a father, as in the case of financial abortion, with forcing a woman to become pregnant and carry a child she doesn't want. And this is basically the basis of her argument in his article. Next. Both movements want a hero, and they have finally found one in Nick Loeb, the former fiancé of Sofia Vergara. Loeb is currently seeking custody over their pre-embryos, despite a legal agreement that they could only be implanted and brought to term with both parties' consent. Now dishonest Jessica claims that the men's rights movement have found a hero in Nick Loeb, but of course she doesn't cite any evidence, she seemingly just pulls the claim out of her arse. I did a quick search and couldn't find any MRA link to Loeb, apart from this article. If anyone knows of any, please link below in the comments. And for the record, I'm on Sofia Vergara's side in this debate. I don't believe that she should be forced into parenthood against her will, for the exact same reasons I gave in segment 1 concerning fathers. Next. Loeb's decision to take his custody battle public on the pages of the New York Times told a very disturbing story to reproductive justice activists, one that is about control. Planned Parenthood President Cecile Richards told me over email, "What's troubling about Loeb's op-ed is that it seems to be a kind of public shaming, bordering on bullying, in order to force someone to have children against her will. These are deeply personal decisions for women, and they should be respected." So just in case you are unfamiliar with this case, Sofia Vergara and Nick Loeb were a couple. They went through the IVF program and produced an embryo for implantation, but broke up before the implantation could take place. And now Loeb wants the embryo implanted, assumingly in a surrogate. I will discuss this, and its pitfalls, at the end. Next. It's because of how deeply personal and complicated issues of IVF and parenthood are that legal agreements are commonplace. Dr. Sigel Klipstein, a reproductive endocrinologist and chair of the ACOG Ethics Committee, told me that disputes like this are generally resolved by the courts using the right to know standard. The person who says no will win. You can't parent against your will, she said. Well, actually, you can force someone to be a parent against their will, but only if that person is the father, as we saw in segment 1 of this video. Next. Even without a legal agreement, the medical community largely agrees that pre-embryos should only be implanted with the consent of both donors. The American Medical Association ethical guidelines say that embryos should not be available for use by either provider or changed from their frozen state without the consent of both providers. And I agree with this 100%. Next. The guidelines note that even if a parent was to be legally freed from parental obligations, the absence of a legal duty does not eliminate the moral duty many would feel toward any genetic offspring. In other words, most people would feel some sort of obligation, and likely love, for genetic children brought into the world. So by claiming custody of the pre-embryos and bringing them to term, Loeb would be forcing Vergara into parenthood, and likely a lifelong relationship with him. Yes, which is something that happens to fathers all the time. Once again, refer to segment 1 of this video. Next. Teresa Levine, a lawyer and board member of the Infertility Association, resolve that possible genetic pull is beside the point, and something both parties should have considered before they created the pre-embryos. When Levine was married, she went through many, double digits, she tells me, fertility treatments in order to create embryos for implantation with her then husband. Mid-cycle, her husband told her stop. He was worried about financial problems. He threatened divorce, Levine says. But, she says, her husband promised they would resume implantation. They never did. Soon after, Levine's husband asked for a divorce, and wanted to stop Levine from implanting the pre-embryos for fear of being responsible for child support, he told the court. Levine says the child support argument was just an excuse, but her ex-husband won over the judge. The embryos were donated to research and it is something that I live with every day, she says. It's the first thing I think of every single morning when I wake up. So here Jessica shows us a case where the genders are flipped, and predictably paints a much more sympathetic picture. And as much as I sympathize with Risa Levine, she still should not have the right to force parenthood on her ex-husband. Her desires to be a parent should not suppress her ex-husband's right to not want to be a parent against his will. Next. But while Levine is empathetic to Loeb's argument that the IVF process clearly shows that the intent was to parent, he's not the best representative for this issue. Levine points out that, legally, he has a very weak case. For example, Loeb claims his religious beliefs are partly behind the custody battle. Does one person's desire to avoid biological parenthood outweigh another's religious beliefs in the sanctity of life and desire to be a parent? But if Loeb is Catholic, she asks, why go through with IVF at all? Eleanor Robertson pointed out the same contradiction in The Guardian. The Church specifically forbids in vitro fertilization, and all assisted reproductive technologies that involve conception that takes place outside of sexual intercourse within marriage, on the grounds that they are contrary to the dignity and equality that must be common to parents and children. Many pro-life proponents are quiet on the ethics of reproductive technology, because alienating infertile couples does not make for good political strategy. But the doctrine of anti-choice organizations is quite clear. The American Life League derides in vitro fertilization as a practice that makes babies without God, for example, and the Pro-Life Action League has even protested IVF clinic openings. This was not the first time Loeb found himself unable to control the reproductive rights of his former partner, either. When I was in my 20s, I had a girlfriend who had an abortion, and the decision was entirely out of my hands, he writes. You might have noticed that we are deep into the article by now, yet apart from the title, and a bit of poisoning of the well at the start, Jessica hasn't mentioned men's rights at all. That's about to change. So hold on to your seats, folks. Jessica is about to use her superior intellect to make the connection between men's rights and the Loeb case. Ready? Here we go. This feeling, women are controlling everything, seems to be behind many men's rights complaints. In other words, lack of reproductive rights for men isn't a real issue because it doesn't affect women. Continue Jessica. In 2006, for example, an organization calling themselves the National Center for Men filed a suit on behalf of 25-year-old Matt Dubby, a man who didn't want to pay child support for a baby he never intended to bring into the world. Dubby told a reporter at the time, "We have no choice. We have to live with whatever the women decide." Now Jessica is trying to paint the situation as, it's just men whining because they feel they don't have control anymore. You know, the typical response from Valenti to any men's rights issue. Let me just point out again that feminist Karen DeCrow was quoted as saying, "Just as the Supreme Court has said that women have the right to choose whether or not to be parents, men should also have that right," she told the New York Times, calling this the only logical feminist position to take. But I guess she only made that argument because she was a whiny male, who felt she was losing all her power, right Jessica? Next. It's a feeling of powerlessness that, I believe, many men are not accustomed to. Women, on the other hand, know all too well what it feels like to have your reproductive choices limited, judged and controlled. Yes Jessica, that's because unlike men, women actually have reproductive rights. It's a bit hard to limit, judge or control something that does not exist. Next. For cases like Loeb's and Levine's, there are no clear legal answers. Allowing Loeb to obtain custody of pre-embryos in the face of the contract he signed seems unlikely and unfair. That said, people like Levine point out that there needs to be new legal ground carved out alongside new medical practices. The laws need to recognize that embryos are neither property nor are they life, they are the potential for life, and they need their own category, she tells me. No clear legal answer? Really? Are you fucking serious, Jessica? It's a very, very simple legal answer. Unless both genetic donors agree to the embryo being implanted, the embryo should not be implanted. That's simple. Why do I get the feeling that Jessica only wants the choice left up to the female donor? Next. For Clipstein, the answer is more clear-cut. You can have someone use your genetic material against your will. This isn't a men's rights issue, she tells me, because he, Loeb, can parent, can use his sperm. Why should she allow him to have babies with her genetic material when his genetic material is just fine? And I would agree with Clipstein, the Loeb case is not a men's rights issue, and as far as I can tell, the only one claiming that it is Jessica Valenti in an attempt to take a shot at the MRM. But I do find Clipstein's words very interesting. You can have someone use your genetic material against your will. Really?
That's what you're in between a woman saying, I'm on the pill, and actually not being, and getting pregnant because she wanted to get pregnant, and stealing her partner's sperm out of a condom in the bathroom.
I have to say that, for me, there is actually no difference in that. If you're lying to somebody about whether you're... there is no difference. If you're lying to somebody, if a man is sleeping with you and you look him right in the eye and you say to him, it's fine, I don't want a baby, trust me, it's fine.
Would you expect him then, having had that, that
my
baby
warning,
at work,
you see, is for young women are warned all the time, be in control of your own body. You have rights over your own body. The point of my piece was to warn young men who might be a bit too naive and trusting.
Well, they're sure not going to be naive now, though,
well, that's better,
which is
because
good.
then you're having fewer children who are going to be with parents who don't...
Ultimately, Clipstein points out, laws around custody of pre-embryos may give men more rights than in traditional pregnancies. When a woman is pregnant, he doesn't have a choice because of the implications his choice has on a woman's reproductive liberties. None of that comes into play when you have embryos outside of the body. Will reproductive technology give men the freedom they've always said to have wanted? Or will they just use it as an excuse to further control the women in their lives? Oh Jessica, it's always the evil men's controlling the poor helpless women's, with you, isn't it? Once again, for the record, just let me state that I'm totally on the side of Vergara in this case, and Loeb should not have the right to force parenthood on her. But let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Imagine if Loeb actually won the case, something I can see happening, but let's just suppose that it did, for argument's sake. Let's suppose Loeb had the embryo implanted into a surrogate womb, and produced a child. Should Vergara be financially responsible for a child she did not agree to have? Should she be forced to take responsibility for the child? Should she be shamed if she didn't want to take part in the child's life? Should she be held accountable for the rest of her life, for what others chose to do with her genetic material? Or should she be given the right to opt out of parenthood, as it was something done without her consent? Personally, if it was up to me, I'd give her that right, which is exactly the same right I ask for men. And it's that simple. Anyway, that's it for this episode, folks, so until next time, always remember, don't drink the poison Kool-Aid.
I am writing the piece to get men to be more aware, especially I wrote in the piece, if you're a mum with a teenage son, say to him, protect yourself.
But against what?
Use a condom.
Against
women
women
I understand this. I do completely understand what Liz is saying.
At least I'm bringing the subject out. I know lots of women who do this. If I know lots of women, there must be lots of women who do this.
You've been very honest to say that you did it in the first place.
I spoke to a woman who had her fertility chart in a drawer. She was working out when she was ovulating to have sex, didn't tell him that. So this is something that happens. There's no point just saying it doesn't happen, women are trustworthy.
Do you think instead of going for like the last resort then, do you think it would have been more beneficial to write a report about not leaving it too late, and sort of if that is something that you want to do?
Yes, absolutely, that's a very good point. I said in my piece, if only I had been honest and spoken to my younger husband about my fears, we wouldn't have got married. I'd have married someone who was ready to have a child and I would have had a child. Honesty doesn't pay, and it actually scuppered me completely.
Honesty doesn't pay?
Honesty, it doesn't pay what I did. If I'd been honest with my husband, he'd have said, look, I'm not ready, marry someone else. And I might have gone to a sperm bank or done something different. But I'm just saying that when women are particularly dangerous and vulnerable, towards the end of their 30s, early 40s.
And I can understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always wanted to be a mum, and I know that if I hadn't have met the right person and I was getting towards the end of my biological clock,
Holly, you must have a moral compass somewhere.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I would never.
I
know I would never ever resort to that. I would have explored one of the other options that you'd spoken of, because I couldn't have lived with myself.
But I do understand Liz's point, saying that there are women that do. And this highlights the point that if you're a guy really of any age, and you say beware if you're dating someone who is in their late 30s, early 40s, because there's every possibility they could pull this stunt on you. If that had happened, if you had got pregnant and your partner, your husband, had said, that is exactly not what I wanted to happen, and I'm afraid we're through, I'm leaving, would you have expected him to have supported the child that he had really very little part in conceiving?
Probably wouldn't have, because I'm very independent. I would have probably done it on my own, but I do know...
Does a woman have any right to ask for help if she has a child that way?
I don't... probably not,
She
no.
can't have a right to ask,
But I know a woman who did that, and she's chased for many years her ex through the CSA.
Does she know that?
He doesn't know that
he doesn't know this is how
manipulated
she did
him,
it?
no. So she has chased him for financial support.
There were some guys here who had their say. One man says the whole thing was devastating when it happened to him. He recalls our relationship had been fun but casual. The woman I had dated for a few weeks, and then she was moving to Australia for a few months, which seemed to make a natural end to things. We certainly never talked about a long-term future. So when she called with the news of her pregnancy, that was shocking enough. But the confession that she made left me doubly stunned. My reaction, my gut reaction, was to have nothing more to do with that, he says.
Yeah, see, so much is spoken about women's rights. I think really my piece was not to say what I did was a good idea. It was to warn men that women are much more manipulative than they might think.
And there'll be a lot of guys watching this now who'll think twice about the relationship that they're in.
Well,
is that a good thing?
Well, I think it's always a good thing. I mean,
breeding
listen,
mistrust.
It's always a good thing to bring difficult things out into the open. It's always good to have these discussions. But to say any man who moves in with a woman in her late 30s or early 40s, as you said, should take it as read that she will want to use him to procreate, I really hope that's not the message that we will take home from this. I really hope it's not. I hope it's that we in a way, it sort of put the light for men onto women, because women, we are raised always to be quite frightened of becoming pregnant, actually, you know, by men who say, as I said, I'll be very careful, and then they're not, because at the end of the day, who has to deal with that? They always say, oh, we'll deal with it. No, I will deal with it.
Yeah, but we're not talking about teenagers.
It's spun it round, no, exactly. So now it's kind of saying to men, you also have to be careful, by the way, blah, blah, blah.
Well,
but as I said to you, Holly,
I
it's
think that
not
can
the
only
same.
be a good thing.
Well, yes, well,
It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program Mark Potok, Senior Fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center and Editor-in-Chief of their Intelligence Report. Mark, we've been talking a lot lately about men's rights activism and sort of concurrently, although they do distinguish themselves, the anti-feminist movement in the United States and Canada. And back in the spring of 2012, the Intelligence Report from the SPLC put out sort of a statement about some groups within the men's rights activism sphere that you guys are watching, but correct me if I'm wrong, you did not designate them as hate groups.
That's true. There was a lot of confusion at the time. Simply, we wrote an article that was very critical of many of the websites and the people behind them in the so-called manosphere, these men's rights organization, but we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day. But we did not list any of them as hate groups, and we haven't to this day.
Am I totally not kidding?